In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can connect a touch sensor and an RGB NeoPixel LED strip so that every time you touch the capacitive touch sensor, you get a new color on the LED strip. For this project, we're going to be using CodeKit, which is an easy to use Arduino block coding application, which you can find in the link at the video description or by going to edukits.co/code. So let's get started with wiring. You're going to need to connect the LED strip to ground and 5 volts and its signal pin to pin number 8 on the Arduino board. And then for your capacitive touch sensor, you'll also want to connect the touch sensor to ground and 5 volts, and its signal pin is going to go to pin number 9 on the Arduino. Now let's get started with coding. Over in our left sidebar in CodeKit, you can see all the different block categories we have access to. Let's get started by adding our LED strip, which is under the color category. We can grab this attach lights on pin block and put it in our start section, which is the part of the code that's going to run at the start of our program. In our case, we have 4 LEDs, 4 pixels, and they're connected to pin number 8 on the Arduino board. Now we've set up our LEDs. The next thing I'm going to want to do is to set the color of these LEDs. So eventually we're going to set them to a random color, but for now let's just set all the lights to a single color. And I'm going to change that to red. Now let's upload the code to see what this basic logic does. I've got CodeKit Pro so I can upload in one click, but if you're just getting started, you can click that copy button. It'll save the code to your clipboard. You can upload in the Arduino IDE. So you'll observe that the LEDs on our LED strip are now all lit up and they're lit to the color red. Now I'm going to show you how we can do this for a random color. So I'm going to move this to the forever block, which means that all the code in here is going to run forever and ever. We're going to set all the lights to red, and then I'm going to add this little delay block, which means that we have a little break before we resume the loop. So this is for 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. So we're going to set the lights to a color, wait 500 milliseconds, and then repeat the loop forever. What I'd like to do now is create a random color, which we're going to do by specifying the individual color components. You can find this block over here under color operations and drag this in instead of the color. So now instead of saying we're setting all lights to red, we're setting lights to a color with a red amount of 50, a green amount of 50, and a blue amount of 50. These values go from 0 to 255, where 0 is completely off. So a red value of 0 would be there's no red, and a green value of 255 would mean the green color component of the pixel is on at full blast. So to create a random color, all we need to do is pick a random value for each one of these 3 values. And to make this a little easier to work with, I'm going to right click on the block and select external inputs, which is just going to put each of those on its own line. So under the mathematics section, we can find this block that is called random integer, and an integer is just a whole number. So we can select a random integer from 0 to 255, which that's the range of our values that we can have for a specific channel, and then duplicate this twice so that now each of our red, green, and blue values are completely random. Now, if I upload this code, what's going to happen is we're going to set all the lights to a random color, wait 500 milliseconds, and then repeat the loop where we're setting a random color and then waiting again. And this is going to happen over and over again. Some changes we'd like to make here are we'd like to connect the button so that whenever you press the capacitive touch sensor, you're going to get a completely different random color. So to do this, let's grab an if block to set up some logic. So under logic, we can drag this if block under forever. And what this is going to do is this is going to run the code inside of it only if a condition that we specify is satisfied. So at the moment, if true is the condition, and true is always true, so it's going to run whatever's in there. I'm going to drag this little set all lights to random color block, and I'm going to drag the delay out here and change it to 10. This just means that there's a short delay in between each of our checks. And now it's time to add the button logic. So what I'm going to do here is under logic, grab this little comparison block, which allows us to check if two things are equal. And what we want to do is under sensors, under input output, grab the state of pin number 9, which is, if you remember, where we connected our capacitive touch sensor. And if the touch sensor is pressed, then that value is going to be high. So what our if statement here is doing is we're saying if the state of pin 9, which is our touch sensor, is high, which means if our touch sensor is pressed, then we're going to set all lights to a random value. And I can upload this code for you now to see, and you'll notice that it isn't quite there yet. So if I press this, you'll notice that when I'm pressing down on the touch sensor, the colors are cycling through very quickly. We're getting all sorts of different colors, and it's all happening way too quick. What we want to happen is the color changes only once every time we every time we press the button. And the important thing, the key idea here is that we need to track when the button is released. So to do this, I'm going to create a new variable, and it's going to be a Boolean, which is a fancy word for a true-false value. And this is going to be called last state. And every time after we check whether the touch sensor is pressed or not, we're going to save that value. Whoops, I'll remove the comment and I'm going to duplicate that and put it over here. So now we have this variable last state, which we can reference elsewhere in the code, that stores whether or not the button was pressed last time we checked. And for our logic, to detect whether this is a new press, we need to make sure that the last time we checked, it wasn't pressed. So we need to add a new if block that's under logic, and then drag our random lights setter in there. And our check here is going to be another comparison under logic, and we're going to check if our variable last state, whoops, I'm going to undo that. We're going to be checking if our variable last state was high, and I can duplicate that high value there. We'll change that to low. So now, to change the lights to a random color, we're checking two things. Firstly, if the button is pressed, and secondly, if it was not pressed last time we checked. So is this a new press? And if it is, we're going to set all the lights to that random color. Now let's upload the code and see it in action. This time it's going to work how we expect. When I press the button for the first time, we get a new color. When I press it for the second time, we get a totally new color. And I can keep doing this. We get new colors every time I press the button. This is just one of the cool things you can do with RGB NeoPixel strips within CodeKit. There are heaps more color blocks over here for you to explore and play around with, and heaps of inputs and outputs, sensors and motion blocks for you to have more parts, components, sensors, controls to interact with these LED strips. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you'd like to see more like it, subscribe to our channel. The link to CodeKit is in the video description.